Okay, the game is Britannia, and this was a high ranker on my thumbs list. Not at the very top, but had about 30. The highest thing has 44. That's Victory Game Civil War, which is kind of a longish game. I was looking for something that would be a little medium length, because right now I'm still busy clipping my Der Weltkrieg Western Front. Damn four side-mounted counters that need to be clipped 8 times, and it's harder to clip sides than anything else. So it takes about 3 times as long to clip them. Speaking of clipping, I made the perhaps mistake, but of clipping Britannia's round counters, and my old storage situation, which was just to keep them in the counter sheets, it doesn't work very well. They fall out pretty easily now. Gonna have to end up bagging them. I did that with other things like Kingmaker, where the box was falling apart so much. So what is this game? Well, we've done 2 others of this series. It's a family of games. Before, I've done Maharaja up here in Italia. Italia is my most... Those are actually my most recent editions of this series. This is... well, I'm not terribly fond of the whole series, but this is sort of the classic first game of this design. It is the most simple of the bunch. Let's take a look at what the... I've got it set up already. Let's take a look at how the rules work. And I'm not going to go into terrible detail, but I'm going to give at least an overview of it. So you got these little round things. These are your armies. And the Romans have these little forts, and these little hexagons are leaders. Up here you've got little markers to track how much population growth you've accumulated. When this runs around and hits 3, you get an extra dude. Let's see, little raider markers. Everybody's got one of these cards for each power they control, and I've got additional ones over here for people who have not yet come in. The thought of the game is that, or the concept of the game is, that you get a pile of different powers, and you got to score points with them, and they're not all equal, not by any chance. So, in order to beat the odds, you kind of have to do better with your powers than maybe is expected in the game, whatever that may mean. It's possible, this is what they used to do at WBC, to have a bidding mechanism for it. I didn't like the particular bidding mechanism that I heard from there, because, well, you got first choice if you got the highest bid. Well, I didn't really necessarily want first choice. I just didn't want one power. I would think that there's one. Basically, I don't think the game is balanced as written. And I'll get into that later. But I'm in disagreement with everybody else in the world, it seems. You got this little setup card that tells you how all the nations start the game. That's always going to be the same. In fact, the order at which the powers come into the game is also the same, but you do have this nation control list. Now the game holds between 3, and that includes 3 with a short game, up to 5 players, but the color coding is designed for 4 players, very clearly, and my poor little brain would get confused if, I had all kind of different colored pieces. It's not that terrible, but this is, with that handy bonus in hand for the game, it seems like a good 4-player game, and I usually don't play it in any other number because of that. I have no idea, actually, I've never played it in any number because of that, and I have no idea how balanced it is in other numbers. You'd feel like it was designed for 4, so that's probably how they got it best. What about the rules for this sucker? Alright, well, there's a sequence of play of players, an order of play. Each power takes its turn in that order. So, for example, no matter what happens, the Romans always go first as long as they're on the board. And what you'll find is that the later powers go later in the turn. Now, going later is often an advantage, but it doesn't have to be. In each of your turns, you do the following, and this is the general rule. There are powers that aren't going to follow this, and that's actually specified on the power cards, I think. Enough for this one. Yeah, there's notes. It may be covered there. It may not. In some cases, for example, the Romans don't. They have all kind of special rules. But the first thing you do is you increase population. And what you do is you count the number of areas you got. And that's how many points you go up. Except that areas that don't look plain green, the mountains and swamps and stuff, only count a half point each. You've got an area by having a dude in it. Then if you have invading pieces, and those are going to be listed along this turn record chart, where all kind of special important information. You kind of have to be aware of how this works every bit as much as you have to be aware of these cards. These cards are going to tell you when and how you score victory points, as well as perhaps some special rules like may submit to both the Romans and Angles. And then you got to look that up and figure out what it means. So this is a game that requires to play well, to score well. It requires you to be aware not only of what you're going to do, but because you're conflicting with other people, what they're going for, what their goals are, and whether or not you want to go to the best places for you because you might get booted out afterwards, or whatever along those lines. Okay, so invasion phase, you're going to be looking on here, and you set up troops. And I've already done that for the first turn. We've got an invasion of Romans. And that starts here, 15 Romans. It tells you set up the pieces and put 15 Romans in a major invasion. Hey, what does that mean? That means it's a special kind of invasion where they get 2 turns in a row. And here's the rest of what they got. And then there's other special stuff. For example, if they're in italics like this, they're raiders, which are able to run out from... Wow, I'm getting like really hyper with the camera. But they're able to come in from sea, burn something down, and leave, if they so desire. It also tells you where you have leaders coming into play, and if you have boats, which allows you to do kind of coast-to-coast movement with your troops. Don't see a lot of that being used. They show up all the time, but I mean, there are plenty of powers that have boats at various times. They're generally not used too often in the game. Okay, so you set your pieces up on the invasion phase. Great. Now you get to move. Well, movement is pretty simple in this. Everything can move 2 spaces, with some exceptions. So if you can move forces, you can take pieces of a stack, and you can kind of boop, boop, 2 spaces. Exceptions are you can't cross these special terrain areas in general. Other is you can't pass through where an enemy is, unless you have twice as many troops as him. Now you have to worry about stacking here too, and we'll touch that in a moment, because there's 2 different forms of stacking. Yeah, why don't we? So there's stacking and there's overpopulation. Stacking affects you when you move, overpopulation affects you at the end of your turn. So stacking is that you're only allowed 3 armies in a normal area and 2 in a highland area with most groups. The Romans have an exception. However, you may have 1 group of an unlimited number in a non-highland, the clearer areas. Swamps are considered highland, whatever. They're lowland. Or up to 4 in a highland area. That's equivalent to the capital in Hispania, if you've played that, and I think there are similar restrictions in both Italia and Maharaja, but I don't really remember. Sea areas have no stacking restrictions. Overpopulation is a different issue, which is at the end of your turn, you have to have no more pieces on the board than twice the number of areas you have. Now that includes highland areas count as full areas for this. Alright, raids and invasions. This is kind of the special stuff. Raids, like I said, you can sail in. I think you're allowed to move after that. Yeah, you can move to an adjacent sea area and then land. You can move directly to a sea and then move 1 further land area. Or you can stay at sea, or you can move a sea area. Now, each power that's got sea power, naval power, has the ability to be only in certain sea areas. So the Romans can only be in the English Channel. They also can't raid. So they will, not be able to kind of try to outflank. They've got to come right across. That's not a big problem for them because they kick ass. so you've got this kind of multiple movement with the raid, but then here's the thing. After you raid, you can pull back to sea. And that allows you to score points for killing things. Many of the powers get points for killing stuff. For example, each Roman army destroyed. We don't have any raiders out right now. We'll see them as we go through the playthrough. Now, invasions work a little different from raiders. You have all the same options, except you cannot do D. You cannot move a sea area and stay there for a turn. You also can't pull back afterwards. There's major invasions. The Romans start with one of them. Essentially, they get one full turn and then another full turn. Battle. All right, when you're in a space with another player, you grab piles and piles of six-sided dice. And essentially the way it works, both players roll a number of dice equal to the number of people they have. Each 5 and 6 hits. Hey, where do you think that here I stand got that system from? 5s and 6 hits. They will do a point of damage to each army that they hit. That's the general case. Then after each player's rolled dice, first the defender, then the attacker has the option to retreat from the area. The attacker can't do it if the defender does. The defender can retreat to any adjacent area. There's some limitations. You can't go into an area that has enemy pieces, for example. You can't go into the area that you're attacked from. A whole bunch of little niddly stuff like that. I'm not going to worry too much about it. The attacker has to go back to the area he came from, or areas he came from, and he cannot withdraw if that area has enemy pieces in it. So if you did a bypass of the enemy, you might want to judge when you roll your dice and when you choose your attacks, because the attacker gets, the person whose turn it is gets to choose when to make which particular attack. You may choose to do that in a particular order to give yourself a retreat route, or to cut off the defender's retreat routes. Now I think there's further restriction on the defender. Yeah, you can't retreat to an area that is adjacent to an area containing the attacker's armies. So you don't have to fully surround a defender to force him so he can't surrender. You just have to kind of position yourself. And other people could be there, other of the same force. So like Belgae couldn't retreat. Let me show you this. Say the Romans land like this. Yeah, like this. This Belgae cannot retreat if we're fighting this space out, because although he could go here, there's Roman units here. At least that's how I read that. I don't know. It may be there may be an exception there. Adjacent areas which are vacant. No, wait. You could always retreat into your own pieces. It's if it's vacant they couldn't do that. Yeah, I thought that sounded a little wrong. Anyway, it's been a while since I played, and I didn't bother reading the rules. No big shock there, folks. Okay. So some special rules here. Well, leaders give you some additional bonuses, and then there's certain units that give additional bonuses. Leader's bonus is you can walk through highland areas and you have an extra movement point. You get 3 movement points. Some special units are really the Roman armies and the Norman cav, which actually look like they have horses on them. Now the entire Roman army is special, but the Norman cav, there's only a few of them in the game. The rest of the Normans are normal pieces. I think the Romano-British have a cav too, maybe. Maybe not. Yes, they do. How about that? Okay, so, yeah. The knights. And, so, these guys also can move 3 spaces. They don't get the Highland bonus, but they get some combat bonuses. They hit on 4, 5s, and 6s, and they are hit only on 6s. Other special combat bonus, if you're defending in the Highlands, you are only hit on a 6, which makes it particularly hard to dig people out of places like Wales, Cornwall, or Scotland, or the swamps. Right. I already actually went through population increases, how you count that. There's specific rules on how you place new armies. The Romans have a sort of special little thing. As they walk through areas, they build forts. Now, there's a question, and I have some errata, but not all of it buried under here, that isn't really covered, which is, are the Romans limited to the number of forts they can build total? They're limited to the countermix as to the number of forts they can have on the board at any one time. I've always kind of allowed them to actually build more than that total if some of them get destroyed. And for that I use these extra counters to flip over and indicate where they built forts. That's important because they get points on a particular turn. Turn 3, right? No. I don't know. They get points for each territory that they've built a fort in, I believe. Maybe I'm mistaken there. Maybe it's just each territory they own that has a fort in it still. The forts help them maintain their territory, though, because they count as regular armies in that area, although they can't move. There's some special little rules like submission and subject nations. There are some nations, for example the Brigantes here, who may submit. If they get below a certain amount of areas, at any point they can say, may not be any point, it may be only during the Roman turn, but at any point they can say, for example, I submit to the Romans, if they're allowed to submit to them. At that point the Romans have to retreat from their territory. Now, their territories count for Roman victory points to some extent. It's specified in the cards. It's not, there's a general rule in Maharaja for this, I think. There's no general rule for this. It's on the particular power cards. And they also, I believe, get their own points. The one thing they don't get is the right to reproduce unless the conquering or ruling nation has given them that right. And that can be used as an interesting bargaining chit here. Like, okay, I'll let you grow your people if you expand into here. You know, because that could be worth points to both of the players. Okay. Bretwalda and King. At certain turns, 9, 10, and 11, there's a vote for Bretwalda, where you have votes based on the territories you control. And if one player gets the most votes, the majority, then that nation's king is the Bretwalda, and they get a couple extra points. And then there's the king, where you have to have at least 4 areas in England. This is turns 12 through 15. And twice as many areas as any other nation. Then you become king. That's worth 4 victory points. And you get an extra army for that. Then there's special turns specified on the cards when you'd make an assessment for king, maybe Bretwalda, I don't know. How do you win? Well, you win by collecting up these victory points. And they happen on certain specified turns. So, for example, most of the powers get victory points on turn 4. The Romans, however, get victory points. This is it. This is why I mark places with forts. And it's clear that you're allowed to rebuild forts based on this. When you move through an area, I just leave a fort or a marker that a fort was there to indicate what I score on turn 3 instead of trying to write these down or mark them off. And that's an easy little methodology to keep track of that if there's nothing in the new version or, you know, whatever. Okay. But the Romans work a little differently. They get points on turn 5. And there's always a few powers kicking around that get points when everyone else isn't getting them. Often going very last in the turn, making a quick stab for extra points on the point score turns is a good way of getting these things. There's not a whole hell of a lot here. A little bit of historical notes about what's going on here. A friend of mine always put this. He was the guy I knew who maybe most liked the game. Big war gamer, but, you know, got a kick out of little things like this as well as war games. Well, he made a couple of quotes about it. Like, Britannia is a pretty good 4-hour game, and it's a terrible 6-hour game. Well, we played too many games of Britannia with people who were slow or just trying too much to optimize. And if you spend too much time on this game, it does turn into an amazing drag fest. Of course, with me videoing, I'm going to sound like one of those slow people. I'm usually not for this. I have my AP moments, and I do even in this, but they're just a few moments. But it's really tough when you've got new players because they've got to look up everything. They really do. Otherwise, they're not going to have a chance in hell in the game. Of course, you could just say, well, that's part of the game is learning everything. I don't really like that. It might be helpful if there was a summary of all the powers. I'm sure somebody's got a player aid like that. Just hand it out to everyone. As well as the turn record chart, because otherwise it's just a pain you're constantly pawing over each other's cards. But the other thing was that somewhere or another I have History of the World kicking around, and he hated that game because it was so ahistorical. And I'm like, well, this is not too different. Well, what he saw was the direction to put the powers where they historically wanted to go, and that's what this game really does. You have where they historically were or desired to be is where you get the biggest points. So you try to do the things they historically did. There's this direction to actually play out a historical variant. Whether or not you actually follow it, it may not be your best choice game-wise, but there's at least this push. So you don't see Romans marching into India. Not that they could here, but that was his big objection about History of the World. And he saw this as being a very light, abstract game that wasn't appallingly ahistorical. And it really isn't. You see the tide of history happen more or less as it did. All right, I'm going to load this one up, and we'll start the play. Kind of in the mood for this.